So you may have heard the story. Ernest Hemingway goes into a bar and is challenged to write a short story using only 6 words. And he ends up writing one of the saddest stories ever told.
Complete short story, 6 words.
For sale, baby shoes, never worn.
For sale, baby shoes, never worn. It's an unimaginably sad story. A story of infant death told to us in a small ad in a newspaper, using functional language. But it is a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's a perfect little short story. It's so good that it's been taught in literature and writing classes since the 90s. It shows us how, with artistic dexterity and an understanding of the structure of story, we can produce micro-literature, and that we've all been overthinking the creative process. All we need is a galaxy-sized measure of wit, a shot of whiskey, and a napkin upon which to write. Hemingway's Baby Shoes has been talked about in film, television, books and articles. Arthur C. Clarke wrote in a letter that he can't think of Hemingway's Baby Shoes without crying, adding the small detail that Hemingway won a $10 bet by writing it. But there's a problem. We have no evidence that Hemingway ever wrote these words. It's been so routinely repeated, I decided to do my own research.
For sale, baby shoes, never worn.
Did you know that Ernest Hemingway won a bet with only 6 words? Hemingway was
Imagine a story that could be told in just 6 words. Well, that's exactly what
Ernest Hemingway once claimed he could tell a story in just 6 words.
It's such a compelling story. Both the story of Hemingway going into a bar and with a shot of whiskey dropping this literary bombshell, but also the story of infant death, told with such functional language. Hemingway's Baby Shoes has become synonymous with how modernist artists and writers were able, with simply a flourish of their pen or brush, in a flash of inspiration, flex their creative powers and drop a masterpiece. It's a highly romantic notion of artists and writers, that they have such mastery over their craft, such sharp wits, that all it takes is a flash of inspiration and they can drop this bombshell. It's an idea borrowed entirely from the Romantic poets. Wordsworth, Keats and Shelley each wrote of their flashes of inspiration, and we imagine them searching for scraps of paper upon which to write their sudden revelation. And Hemingway was a brilliant writer. He's known for his simple, direct and unadorned prose. He wasn't given to overtly poignant phrasing. But if anyone could have turned Baby Shoes out in 6 words over a shot of whiskey, Hemingway's a pretty good fit. He certainly knew how to turn a phrase using sparse phrasing without unnecessary flourishes. The story gives us the context immediately, so perfectly in the first line, for sale. We know that it's a classified ad in a newspaper, and the fact that it's only 6 words long adds to this context, because people were normally charged per word for placing such ads. And of course the fact that they're baby shoes only adds to the poignancy, because infant death is always tragic. And the fact that the shoes are never worn gives us a hint of the promise of a life that will never be fulfilled, the paths that will never be trodden, a road that will never be travelled. Hemingway's Baby Shoes gave rise to a new genre of literary output, flash fiction, where writers would constrain themselves within a few minutes and just a few words, with a dash of modernist brevity and a hint of minimalism. They were able to muster up a microcosm of human drama. And certainly the bar scene of a writer going into a bar and challenging himself or others to produce some literary masterpiece has precedent. We have great descriptions of tavern drinking clubs and writing clubs being held in taverns during Shakespeare's day. There's the Mermaid Club, and famously Ben Jonson's Apollo Club. Each met in bars or pubs. They drank, they wrote, they exchanged their output. In fact, there's even a word for this kind of mode of production, Trinken Literatur. But despite, anecdotally, Hemingway being a good fit for the author of Baby Shoes, with his history of going to bars and taverns and setting challenges, we have no primary accounts of him doing this. There's no mention in any letters, diaries, or notes. So if he didn't come up with Baby Shoes, where does it come from? It's the 90s. Video rental stores are the coolest thing in town, and soldiers were returning from Desert Storm. A literary agent in New York called Peter Miller wrote a book with an exclamatory title, Get Published, Get Produced. And Miller's account in 1991 is the first time in print that Hemingway's name had been associated with the Baby Shoes story. In his book, Miller states that he was told the Hemingway story in around 1974 by a well-renowned literary syndicate editor. It's worth noting that Hemingway died in 1961, and so if Miller's memory is accurate, it means that the story hung around for at least a couple of decades before Miller wrote it down in text. Miller has never divulged who exactly told him this story, but he repeated it in another book, and despite my attempts to contact him, yes, he's still around,
I'm looking for those golden nuggets.
we have no idea who it was that gave the story to Miller. And all subsequent accounts from 1991 onwards of Hemingway writing Baby Shoes in a bar come from Miller's original account, and it's from that they gain their credence. However, we know that earlier iterations of the Baby Shoes story were given in newspapers and magazines throughout the 1920s. Baby Shoes appeared in several different forms ranging from 4 to 7 words long in newspapers and magazines throughout that period. In fact, it appeared so many times that by 1927, when a newspaper wanted to promote classified ads as a great option for its readers, in a cartoon strip it used the Baby Shoes story. The earliest mention of the Baby Shoes story appeared in a newspaper in 1910, and it appears that it was actually in a classified ad. At this time, Hemingway would have been 10 years old, so it's very unlikely that the story originates with him. My favourite version of Baby Shoes comes from a magazine called Judge in 1921. In this version, it's a baby carriage that's being sold, and a newspaper journalist who sees the classified ad is so heartbroken, he decides to pay a visit to the parents. When he gets there, he finds that the reason they're selling their baby carriage that's never been used is because in fact they need a double, because they're expecting twins. It seems Baby Shoes probably originated as a genuine classified ad, coming out sometime in the early 1900s, probably on the heels of the Great Depression when times were tough. The story over the years mutated from a carriage to baby clothes, eventually landing with baby shoes. The story seems to have become something of a commonplace, appearing in books and magazines, and it seems to show something of the power of language, of brevity, of how much poignancy can be packed into just a few words. It also shows the power of classified ads and was used for that purpose. Then there's a gap of about 50 years until Miller references Hemingway in relation to the story in his 1991 book. Our taste for drama pushed the story from being a perennial newspaper and magazine commonplace towards being the work of a well-known author, and it was pushed from being something that he challenged himself to do to being something that was challenged to him, and then pushed towards a story in which he won a bet, and then finally something that he boasted he could do, write a story in 6 words before pulling the rabbit from the hat or the baby shoes from the grieving parents.
Ernest Hemingway once claimed he could tell.
What we learn is that we love a sad story. We love the idea of an artist or writer having a flash of sudden inspiration. And we love the idea of stripping the complexities of story down to its bare-bone components. We love all of these almost as much as we love the certainty of knowing that a giant of literature, a tragic figure within himself who suffered from depression and unalived himself, understood deeply the grief symbolized in a pair of unused baby shoes. Perhaps we could be forgiven for wanting to believe that a bar bet with a rugged, though tragic, author could result in a piece of writing that conveys so much humanity by its absence. A 6-word piece of utilitarian text that reads like a tragic haiku, denuded of any artistry other than the functional syntax that conveys the grief of a couple resigned to sell the shoes their baby will never wear, partly because they need the money for the funeral, or partly because the sight of the unused baby shoes is just too much to bear. So let's focus on the Judge magazine version, where the couple had twins and needed a double stroller. Let's enjoy the genius of these 6 words and all that they can convey, and let's stop saying that Hemingway wrote this as a bar bet in Cuba, because the story works just as well without his name being attached.